Welcome to How is God Calling You? A production of CTNY, the Catholic television network of Youngstown. It is a show that seeks to stimulate and assist youth and young adults to discover the path that God has chosen for them. Vocations to the priesthood, religious life, marriage, and single life will all be discussed. Your program host is Father James Corda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of How is God Calling You? Today we're going to talk with the Society of St. Paul. And joining me on today's show is Father Jeff McClure. Father Jeff, it's nice to have you on the show today.
I'm delighted to be here to talk about this really important, exciting, and universal topic.
You know, when we talk about vocations and a priesthood, a religious life, that word vocation comes up all the time. And of course, we understand the difference between vocation, job, career. Why are many young people not looking towards a vocation, but more towards a career or a job?
Well, one of the things is a loss of the sense of the numinous or spiritual. The whole history of humanity could be summed up as an attempt to get on the right side of God, whatever the religions were that form the backbone of every great culture. Now we feel that we could achieve an identity apart from God, and that is a dry well. It never works, and it leaves people lonely, frustrated, and wondering why all of their success in the external world doesn't amount to anything.
You know, one of the influences oftentimes in the life of a vocation or having that vocation realized is the example of someone else. Obviously, and hopefully those examples are out there. Is there some reason why the example is not being related to, or people are not looking up to priests or nuns or brothers? What's kind of the reality?
Well, I think the simplest thing is we don't smile enough to show the inner joy that we have. So people see us as solemn, introspective individuals, different from everybody else. And unless they could see the joy of our faith and the joy of being close to God, they don't consider it as a viable way to live a human and humane life. So I think if we just start smiling more, a lot of people will say, what does he or she know or have that I don't have, but I wished I did?
You know, one of the realities is that about 70% of people who are employed do not like their jobs. Mm-hmm. And if you take that percentage and put it into religious community, I would hope that that percentage isn't as high.
Yes, that would be the thing that I think that we have it almost as a secret. Sometimes, you know, when a group of priests get together to hear confessions at a penitential service, etc., the conviviality among the priests at the dinner before or after is contagious. I just wish people could see it. And the same is true like in religious life. I say our own community here in Canfield's almost like a party community because we celebrate everybody's birthday, then we celebrate their name day, and then we celebrate our saint's feast day. I said, we're a nonstop party group. And I think that that's what the external people can't see. And that's what they need to see if they're going to say, I wish that one of my children could have that happiness, that joy.
Well, and that brings me to another question, and we really haven't spent a lot of time in our show talking about that, is the influence of parents mm-hmm. and grandparents and guardians. You know, when we look back, people our age look back, obviously our families and parents were very involved in the life of the church. So is that not happening, or is there just some different phenomena that's going on?
Well, there's two elements. One, the whole family structure has been so weakened, and that affects it. Two, the families that are involved in the church still are a little hesitant to have their own children follow God so completely in religious life or in the priesthood. And the grandmothers stopped praying somewhere along the line that one of their grandchildren would become a priest or a nun. One time in Walmart's a number of years ago, I was walking through and a sales girl was making small talk with a customer. They were both from the same parish, and the customer said, "I'm looking for a gift for my grandson who's graduating from high school." And my ears perked up because the sales girl immediately said, "Oh, do you think he'd want to become a priest?" And my heart soared for one split second. But then the grandmother said, "Oh no, he's much too macho for that." and it just crushed me. You know, send me your weak, send me the people that don't fit in. And I thought that how different it was when grandmothers would pray that any one of their children or several of their children would dedicate their lives totally to God.
Well, you know, obviously we are all different. And I think it's just, we are a composite of just what the larger world is. You know, we are all different people, different personalities, different likes and dislikes, but yet we make up a group of people that enjoy and celebrate religious life and religious community. One of the aspects that is really and always has been an important part of religious life, whether it's a nun or a priest or a brother, is the education part, is the academics. Why has that always been, and how far does that go back that academics was just an important facet of it?
Well, from the first centuries, if someone was going to proclaim the Word of God, they had to be literate, they had to be able to read and write. And so they would have a special service to play in the liturgy. And then when the formation of monasteries came along, they became the backbone really of the intellectual life of the West. And so the monks would know how to read, write, preserve manuscripts, and in religious life there'd be spiritual reading to help guide the soul. So it's always been there. But there's never been an absolute criterion for the person to be a genius or to be even way above average. Most of the saints who found their way into priesthood or religious life were average and maybe sometimes even a little below average. The great example was the Curé of Ars, the patron of all parish priests. You know, they hesitated so much on ordaining him, and they thought, well, we'll give him a try because he was not stellar in Latin and in academic pursuits. So God chooses people from all intellectual levels, but you do have to be able to have a grasp of the doctrines of the church, to be able to study whatever your particular apostolate is in religious life and do well at it. So it is a part of the formation and part of the criterion in guiding anybody spiritually on helping them make a choice in their life.
I think one of the other aspects is people in the church are becoming and have been more knowledgeable too. You know, it used to be that the priest always knew more than the people in the pew, but that's not always the case. And while it might have been, it's not the norm now. So how important is it for us to be people who are rooted in the past, but yet living in the present and being able to relate to people in the present time?
Well, this is where the great inspired Vatican Council played such a fantastic role, giving the laity an enormous responsibility and really giving them the challenge to be totally immersed into the life of the church. And the priest of today, or the religious brother or sister of today, has to respect and encourage the talents and the knowledge of the laity, and in doing that, makes our own life a lot easier. We avoid a lot of mistakes, and we overcome that terrible evil called clericalism that started with the 12 apostles who wanted great positions in the kingdom and has plagued the church ever since. And the saints have always had to call clerics to be humble servants of the people as a whole.
Well, a little later in our show, we're going to talk more about charisms of different communities, and in particular the charism of the Society of St. Paul. But one of the things that we know is that you are very up on modern telecommunications, not primarily because it's your charism, but that's something that you enjoy and you do. Why has it been so important for you to do that and to have that wherewithal, especially where people are at in the church today?
Well, this comes to the mystery of the call. From the time I was a child, I loved radio and television. If I had my way, I would have done nothing but watch television and listen to the radio all day. So God, knowing that from an early age, said, where could he fit into my plan? Someone else may love school and want to be in the classroom. And somehow then God will say to him or her, maybe this is a direction I should draw them. Some might want to be at the parish church all the time. And so how our own personalities figure into the mystery of the call is very important. So when I heard about a religious congregation that specialized in that area that I loved from childhood on, well, it seemed to be a good fit for me.
We have just a few minutes before we take a break. You use the phrase of fitting in. There might be folks with us that feel that they have a call to religious life or religious community and maybe feel that they don't fit in. Is there a place for people who feel that they don't fit in?
The place is the vocation director of any diocese, because they may find that there is some place for them in the church. And this is the beginning of the discernment process. And the Lord sends people who are unique, sometimes rebels, to keep everything stirred up when it needs to be stirred up, and to open us to new ways of proclaiming the old truth that God loves us and Christ's message needs to be spread to the world.
We're going to take a break in a minute. Before we do that, I want us to focus when we come back on discernment. And so is there some kind of question that you might want to pose to the people that are with us to think about during our break before we come back?
The main thing is to think about, if you've already lived most of your life, where do you feel that you went right and why? And if you have a lot of regrets about where you went wrong, think about where you went wrong and why. And in both cases, the answer comes down to, did I really listen to the voice of God or not? And how do I hear that voice in the contemporary moment so my future choices will be better?
Well, Father Jeff, we're going to be talking more about that in just a moment. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Johnsons enjoy Friday dinners out. Nothing fancy, just time together to reconnect as family. They make sure others eat as well. By giving to Catholic Charities of Youngstown, the Johnsons join other angels who care for those in need, regardless of religion or race. Show your wings with a gift to Catholic Charities, changing lives one family at a time, providing housing, emergency financial assistance, senior services, and more. Give now at ccdoy.org.
Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Father Jeff McClure of the Society of St. Paul. Father Jeff, we were talking about, before we took a break, about the voice of God and listening. Oftentimes the voice of God is not very clear for whatever reason, and usually it's because we're not listening. But how does the voice of God come to us, and how do we kind of prepare ourselves to listen and to hear that voice?
Well, most of us, when we're very young children, toddlers, our minds are actually more open to it. We're innocent, and there's nothing standing between us and God. And so much so that even atheistic parents get frustrated when their children start praying or talking to God. But as the years go on, our minds become more and more cluttered. Our innocence is driven out. Cynicism is forced into us. Nevertheless, we can look around and think, what is right and what's wrong? And when we come to critical moments in our life, we know we need divine help. And it may not be, the voice coming from God in that sense, but that inner intuition that said, I'm going to do this even though it's hard, and I'm not going to do that even though it's easy. And the more we do that, our character begins to be built up, and we become more disposed to actually hearing the word of God in our life. Now, God is an infinitely wonderful listener, but it's not all that chatty. Nevertheless, there'll be moments when we will have in our life, if we've really prayed about something, what should I do? What should I do? That when we least expect it, we'll get the answer, usually in a short phrase, forgive him. Try that vocation. A short sentence. And we say, well, okay. But the whole discernment process is also to learn how to listen to other people that are trustworthy and are godly. The best way to get close to God is be friends with the friends of God. And if enough people say to you, I think you'd make a good priest or a good deacon or a nun in one order or another, and you discount it over and over, maybe reconsider and say, could that be the voice of God reaching out to me from the people of God? And generally, the answer is yes.
We know that God speaks to everybody in many different ways and many profound ways as well. Why is it now that many people are listening to God later in life to respond to a particular call, as opposed to right out of high school? Is there some reason of why we have delayed vocations nowadays?
Well, I think it's quite simply that the whole culture is career-oriented, success-oriented. And what happens after people have been successes, and they still feel an emptiness. Some of them have went through some heartbreaking romances. Others, have gotten the new car. Boy, I got that sports car and it was fun, and now I got to take it for an oil change, and it's beginning to be a pain. And am I going to just be selling widgets for the rest of my life? And then in that context, they begin to say more sincerely, God, there must be something more to life. And it's at that moment that God says, yes, there is. And they could begin then to rethink what direction they want to go. And you see this in priesthood, in religious life, more and more. But there are still young people, and there seems to be a revival. It used to be 20 years ago, I would say, anybody here want to be a priest or a nun? And they'd all just roll their eyes like I was crazy. Now, if you ask any group of young people that, they have a more serious response. And for whatever reason, the grace of God, they're thinking, maybe that's not so crazy. And so something is happening.
And I think oftentimes what happens is we go through cycles, as history does go through cycles. And so maybe now there's more of a resurgence where there is not only a need for more priests and sisters, but there's more of a need within people to respond to that call. And so that could be the reason. One of the things that I'd like to talk about in particular is charism of your religious community, but also charisms in general, because that's kind of what drives, if you will, a religious community. Talk about charism.
Well, charism always starts really with an individual's profound, transforming encounter with God. And this is where the various charisms come out. A holy person is really given a special grace that maybe they haven't earned, they don't deserve, but it happens. Whether it's Saint Benedict starting a monastic order that lasts now for 1600 years, or whether it's Blessed Alberione, who in 1914, when World War I was breaking out, had this overwhelming desire as a diocesan priest to found a religious congregation of brothers and priests who would work in media, even though they didn't have the term media. He had a mouthful there. He said, well, they're going to work in film, in radio, in the press. And he added this, and anything else human ingenuity comes up with that has to do with social communications. How did he get that idea? How would he know it? Somehow a divine inspiration. And so it is with each of the congregations within the church. Some go to missionary work, some go to hospital work, some to teaching. Some withdraw from the exterior world to be immersed in the interior world in contemplative life. All of them are important. All of them have to do with not only the individual soul, but the soul of the church, and ultimately the conscience of humanity. It's very powerful.
Now let's talk specifically about the charism of the Society of St. Paul and in the mass media. We can still use that word, mass media. How do you exercise that charism, and how do the members of your congregation do that specifically?
Well, the congregation works as a team, and a team within the context of a greater number of teams. Like the Daughters of St. Paul are in 50 countries. They also work in social communications, mass communications in all of its forms, and we work with them. And then we're in 30 different countries, so it's an international way of delivering Christ to the world, but we all share the same methodology in the apostolate. But that's based on a deeper spirituality of Eucharistic visit, communicating personally with God in prayer life. So then we have something to communicate through these various instruments. Now, in the Society of St. Paul, in our community in Canfield, Ohio, working with the diocese, we are involved in radio and television. And also, we have an audio-visual department with the best speakers that we could possibly get from around the country and sometimes around the world. And we then use those on the internet so that also reaches out globally to people. And by divine intervention, the strangest and most unusual people find what they need at the most unusual times, and it's really not only soul-saving, but sometimes life-saving.
Are there other communities around the country and around the world that have that as their charism other than the Society of St. Paul?
Not really. Some have it as part of their charism. Like Maximilian Kolbe's congregation, they would work in magazine work, etc., to promote Marian devotion. The Salesians always have had a great presence in, say, the press and in publishing. The Marinols, even though they're primarily missionaries, they always have their publishing form. The Paulists, who are not to be confused with us, they're in the United States. Their main charism is the conversion of Protestant America, but they've always had a very dynamic publishing house. But their whole charism isn't focused in media the way we are.
You had mentioned the internet. Mm-hmm. How important is the internet for good or bad in our world and in our church today?
Well, the church was way behind the curve, but I'm delighted to say the church is really immersed in it completely now, and the presence of the church is so powerful that in surveys, more people admit to looking for spiritual advice on the internet than going to pornography. So that shows we've made some enormous gains. There are so many religious resources from the Vatican on down that is really amazing on the internet. But I'd like to just keep it like concrete. I went to Australia a couple of years ago to give some talks there. And as soon as I arrived in Australia, I checked my sites and emails, and I had a disturbing one. A young man said, I hate my parents, I hate myself, I'm going to kill them and then kill myself. Now, I was still stuck with jet lag, as you could imagine. It was a little video I just did on how to control your anger, and he didn't feel it helped him at all. So I immediately emailed him back and said, what major city are you near? And thank God he told me. And I immediately gave him phone numbers to the diocese, phone numbers to the suicide hotline. And a few months later, he just sent me a brief message saying, thank you, Father, for being there to help me during my dark period. Now, I've had a lot of other things similar to that. And I'm certain other priests and other religious and other efforts of the church around the world have similar stories to tell. So it is something that is incredibly important, and I think it's divinely inspired.
We're down to the last 2 minutes of our show today. How does that help with fostering vocations?
Well, it should stir people's hearts and minds to say, I want to be a part of that. I want to use my talents, my technical knowledge, to not simply have silly cat videos on the internet, but to have profound Catholic presence on the internet that could reshape people's lives, prevent disasters, and make the whole world a lot more humane as it tries to be a little more holy.
Well, Father Jeff, we certainly appreciate your presence on our show today, and God bless you in your ministry.
And you too, Father Corda.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
How is God Calling You is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Corda.
$33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Hi, I'm Mark Quinn. As I grew up on the south side of Chicago, the Dominican Sisters of Springfield not only taught me, but formed me in my Catholic faith. The sisters worked for very, very little. Now as they've gotten older, they have no savings to fall back on. And we benefited from their sacrifice. And I think it's time that we recognize that much of what we are today, we are because of what sisters did for us. It's our turn to help them out in their hour of need. They don't ask for a lot. They embrace the simple life. I owe them so much. That's why I make an annual donation to the Retirement Fund for Religious. Do you remember the religious men and women who shaped your life? Say thank you to them by donating to the Retirement Fund for Religious at your local parish. Join me, share in the care.